we start with the intergenerational adaptation dialogues. These dialogues bring together experts, decision makers, and young leaders to exchange good practices and lessons learned. Our first dialogue will be dedicated to discuss locally led adaptation. Special thanks to all our partners, especially to the Youth Adaptation Network that currently has members in over 130 countries, but also special thanks to the International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, in Bangladesh, who is our partner and had been also supporting the organization of this dialogue, but as well all the actions related to locally led adaptation. Then, without any other introduction, I am delighted to welcome our keynote speaker. Dr. Saleem Haque is the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh, and he is one of the global leaders. Saleem, thank you very much for accepting this invitation and to be with us today. Talking about climate change or adaptation is not only a technical issue. Climate change is a global challenge, but it also represents a huge opportunity to promote a transformational change. And it is this change is led by people that are committed, that are leading solutions. And you have been one of these persons leading solutions not only in Bangladesh but all over the world. And you started with this topic of locally led adaptation. It's an honor to have you here and that you can also share your experience with the young leaders because we are together in this activity and we want to learn from each other. Then, Salem, if I just can start, I would like that you share with us how did you get involved on climate change issues? How did you start to work? Over to
Thank you
you,
very much.
Salem.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to GCA for organizing this event and inviting me. Apologies for a bad throat. So let me start when I was a young man and I was studying in university. I studied in the UK, in London at a university called Imperial College. And I did my undergraduate degree in biology there. And then I did a PhD also in biology. So I was a science student. I liked science. Then after finishing my PhD, I came back to Bangladesh, where I'm from, and I joined Dhaka University, which is the premier public university in the country. And I as an assistant professor, and I taught there for a number of years. But then I felt that I should do something new. And together with a few friends who were in similar positions of having done PhDs abroad and come back to Bangladesh, we set up an NGO, a think tank NGO called the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, focusing on environmental issues, which this is now in the middle 80s, 84, 85. At that time, environment was not a popular topic or even a recognized topic. It was new and nobody was doing it. So we decided to focus on that. And we developed some of the first interdisciplinary activities on environment generally. And then in the early 90s, I started getting interested in climate change, and I was invited to participate in a number of international studies on the impacts of climate change. It is a very new subject at that time. And I participated in a few international studies and published a few reports on that. And after that, I got invited to participate in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a scientific body of the UN, to be part of that. And from the third assessment report in 2001, I became a lead author. And then again, in the fourth assessment report, I became a coordinating lead author, which is a more senior position. And again, in the fifth assessment report, I was also a coordinating lead author. And so I have been working on the science of climate change, particularly on the impacts on most vulnerable communities in most vulnerable countries, not just in Bangladesh, my country, but in South Asia and also in Africa. I do a lot of work. I have been doing a lot of work in the least developed countries, most of which are in Africa as well. And in the international negotiations, I have been also participating in the COPs. I'm one of the few people who has been to all 25 conferences of parties, but I don't go as a negotiator, I go as an observer, and I advise the least developed countries in the negotiations on the topic of adaptation in particular, and also now loss and damage, which is a new area. I hope that's what you were asking for.
It is just extraordinary, this journey. And Salem, you have been also working on locally led adaptation. And for people that have not been very familiar with the topic, can you share with us what is this locally led adaptation?
Sure. So let me start with the concept of climate change impacts. I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with climate change now, is familiar with the fact that climate change, human-induced climate change, which is raising global temperature, is going to cause and is already causing impacts around the world. And one of the aspects of that impacts is that not everybody is being affected at the same time as we go along. Everybody will be affected sooner or later, but some people are being affected sooner and some will be affected later. And a crude division is that the ones who are affected sooner are the poorest people in the planet, living in the most vulnerable places on the planet. And incidentally, they are the ones who did not cause the problem, but they are the ones who are going to suffer the problem. So there's a very strong moral and injustice element to this. And my work for the last 2 decades has been in working with those vulnerable communities in those vulnerable countries and finding them, talking to them, learning from them, seeing what we can do to help them. When I started this work in the early 2000s, we used to call this community-based adaptation, working with communities at the community level, with the vulnerable communities. And I started 16 years ago a global international conference on community-based adaptation, which is still continuing. We just finished the 15th annual conference just a few days ago on community-based adaptation. But over time, the concept of community-based adaptation, focusing on the most vulnerable communities, has expanded to now what we call locally led adaptation, which goes beyond the most vulnerable community itself and also takes into account the other stakeholders who are working at that local level. So the place which is being affected by climate change, it has communities, households, people that are affected, but it also has local government officials, it has local experts in different fields, it has local colleges and universities and schools, it has local private sector enterprises. So there are many different actors at the local level in these countries, which are now part of this bigger framework of what we now call locally led adaptation. And I'm sure my colleague Aditya Bahadur will explain the different aspects of what that means. But in simple terms, it means identifying the most vulnerable communities and the people in the most vulnerable places, and then seeing how we can help them adapt to the impacts of climate change, because they are the primary victims of the impacts of climate change. And as I said, very often they are the poorest people who have very little capacity to do things on their own, and they need support from outsiders like us. So that's what we call locally led adaptation. And the last point I'll make about it is the emphasis on the word led. As we move from community-based adaptation to locally led adaptation, the word led implies leadership, local leaders. And so one of the things that we want to do, and this is very relevant for the youth dialogue that we are going to have now, is we want young leaders to be emerging. We want to identify them, we want to talk to them, we want to find ways in which we can network with them and dialogue with them and see if we can help each other, not just a one-way street, how we help them, but how they help us, and we work together and join forces together. So local leadership is something that we want to have come out of all of these dialogues going forward. And young people in particular, we hope to see leaders coming out of the young people in different countries. And in particular, in this case, we are focusing on university students. We run a network of universities where we have lots of students. That's the first place we're starting, but that's not the only place we will be looking for young leaders.
Excellent, Saleem, because we are talking about youth leadership. And you have been leading the network of these universities, leading also solutions at all levels. Then from your experience, what do you think are these the role of university students? But the most important are also these university association to lead adaptation solutions at the local level.
Sure. So let me make a couple of sort of framing remarks first. In the global climate change discussions and activities, capacity building of vulnerable countries is something that everybody agrees should be done, and many developed countries also support. But the way it has been done in the past has been to send external consultants from the developed countries to fly in and do some workshops and training and then fly out. We call this fly in, fly out expert involvement in capacity building. While it's useful, it does not leave much behind. And so we have been pushing for some time now, and fortunately in the Paris Agreement, which was agreed in the 21st Conference of Parties in Paris in 2015, we managed to get an article, Article 11, that changed the capacity building paradigm to develop in-country systems of capacity building, so that there is an in-country continuous system of capacity building and not just a fly-in, fly-out expert coming in and telling people what to do. And in that in-country paradigm shift, universities play a very big role. Even the poorest countries have universities. Bangladesh has more than 100 universities. But these universities were never utilized in the past. They were not even talked to. The international consultants would come in, do a workshop, go away. They never knocked on the door of the universities. So what we have done is we have set up a network of universities in the least developed countries. It's called the Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, LUCCC, or LUC for short. And we have already engaged with them in helping the faculty run courses, teaching, training. It's what universities do, and do research. That's also what we do. And we have students, and that's where the youth comes in. We all have students, and the students in many cases are organized. They have environment groups, or sometimes even climate change groups. They're doing things on the ground. So we are reaching out to the students, supporting them to take activities, and particularly focusing on reaching to the most vulnerable communities and seeing how we can engage with them and help them over time to build their capacity to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So young people, particularly university students, have a very, very big role to play here.
Thank you very much, Saleem. And I think now with all the young leaders that are with us, you have a role to play. And in your universities and with your groups, you can leader start many initiatives, and the most important, as Salem said, is building this cooperation, building these bridges to work together. Then thank you very much, Salem. Please stay with us, and we will move forward with the next speaker, because we have the principles of locally led adaptation. And I am delighted to welcome our next speaker, that is Dr. Aditya Bahadur, who is from the IIED, and he will just share with us what are the principles of locally led adaptation, and also how young university students can apply them. Then Dr. Aditya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriana. I hope all of you can hear me. And I don't know if the PowerPoint that I'm sharing is visible. A thumbs up from Adriana will reassure me, so then I can continue.
Yes, and maybe you can put just make a like full screen.
Yes. Yes.
Fantastic.
Does that work?
We can see. It is working very well.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share these principles for locally led adaptation with you. My name is Aditya Bahadur, and I'm a principal researcher with the International Institute for Environmental Development. IIED, in partnership with the World Resources Institute, developed these 8 principles to bring this vision of locally led adaptation that Saleem bhai laid out so effectively before me to life. And these were developed under the aegis of the Global Commission on Adaptation, that, as most of you would know, is a big international effort anchored with the WRI and the Global Center on Adaptation. And that had a locally led adaptation action track. So as part of the action track, we worked to develop these 8 principles over a considerable period of time. Now, how the process that we undertook to do this was we drew a lot on our existing work on climate finance and the governance of adaptation processes, but we spoke to a large number of people who were working on adaptation to solicit their input into refining these. So all the events listed in the yellow box on this screen are the places where we had focused discussions with large numbers of organizations ranging from very small grassroots groups to big multilateral institutions, asking them, what do we need? What is a common charter that all of us can agree to really bring this idea of locally led adaptation to life? Now, I've only been given 10 minutes, so I'm going to take you through each of these principles very quickly. But before I launch into a detailed description of the principles, just want you all to keep in mind that the central purpose of these principles is to make sure that those who are on the front lines of climate risk, the poor and vulnerable communities in the global south, we want to ensure that those people have the power, the agency, the money, and the capacity to lead processes of adaptation as opposed to being passive recipients of assistance. Now, this process of developing the principles all culminated earlier this year at the Climate Adaptation Summit, where 50 plus organizations endorsed and signed up to these principles, giving written statements of the actions that they would take to operationalize these through their work. And the process is still underway. We welcome anyone else who wants to come and endorse as well. Please get in touch with me. Now, the first principle is focused on devolving decision making to the lowest appropriate level. We want to make sure that those decisions that can be made by communities should be made by communities. We want to empower the people who are worst impacted by the impacts of climate change to lead more adaptation decision making. We want to ensure increased direct financial flows to local actors. As some of you might know, research undertaken by my institution, the IIED, a few years ago found that less than 10% of international climate finance finds its way to the local level. And this needs to be remedied. We need to ensure that local actors have more decision-making power and a genuine voice in processes of adaptation. Now, this is not just a pie in the sky. There are small examples of how this is happening across the world, and we encourage people to scale those examples up. Just to give you one tiny example of this, the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, ICCCAD, which is an NGO, has pioneered a process of shared learning dialogues where over a period of time, they work with local communities to enhance their capacities to make key adaptation decisions. The second principle that this community has signed up to is ensuring that processes of adaptation address structural inequalities faced by women, the youth, children, disabled people, displaced populations, indigenous peoples, and marginalized ethnic groups. This is because now there is more than 3 decades of concrete evidence that points to the fact that it is issues of caste, class, gender, governance, and power that lie at the root of vulnerability and risk. And unless you're tackling these, you're not really going to make a difference in the lives of people. And therefore, we need to support excluded people to meaningfully participate and lead adaptation decisions. We need to make sure that there are exclusive and ring-fenced streams of funding that go to these particularly marginalized groups to enable them to lead process of adaptation. And there are examples of financial mechanisms that are dedicated to, for instance, indigenous peoples groups to access this money and lead processes of adaptation. The third principle is around providing patient, predictable funding that can be accessed more easily. I'll take each of these three constituent elements of this principle and talk about them a bit more in detail. When we say patient funding, we mean that adaptation projects, especially those that are working with vulnerable communities or those that are trying to empower communities, need to unfold over a certain length of time. We cannot make a difference if we have piddly little projects lasting from 1 to 3 years or even up to 5 years. Through all the consultation that we did to develop these principles, there was a general consensus that local adaptation processes and projects need to last for 7 years or longer. And therefore, the people who've signed up to these principles are committing to working towards ensuring that these projects are longer. So that's the patient part of this principle. The predictable element is that people trying to access money for locally led adaptation should not be competing with people trying to access money for other kinds of adaptation. Big national level infrastructural projects should not be competing with projects by local communities and local groups. And therefore, we need to have ring-fenced pots of funding that are dedicated to supporting locally led adaptation. The third component of this is funding needs to be accessed more easily. If we truly want to empower people on the ground, we need to make sure that they're able to access the finance that they need to become more adapted to the impacts of climate change. Any of us who've had the misfortune of trying to access money from these big international climate funds knows that from the time you start thinking of a concept to the time the first dollar flows into your account, it can be easily be 5 years, and there is a vast amount of technical input that is needed to make those applications and secure that finance. We need to change that situation. We need to make sure that local groups are able to access this finance. There are interesting innovations happening in the space. For instance, certain funds have allowed video applications, so people can ask for funding using videos or make applications in regional languages as opposed to only English or other big languages like Spanish or French. The fourth principle is around investing in local capabilities and leaving an institutional legacy. We need to ensure, every adaptation program under the sun claims to build capacity, right? It claims to build the capacity of local people who are vulnerable to climate change. Here we are saying we need to do something slightly different. We not only need to build capacity, but we need to develop local capabilities through strengthening local institutions that are owned and run by vulnerable communities that can help make decisions on adaptations in an effective and democratic way. We need to provide the support to local institutions. Where these exist, we need to strengthen them by enabling them to manage finances and access funding from international climate funds. Again, there are some notable examples of this. A big DFID-funded project that ended a couple of years ago called the Action on Climate Today program that me and Saleem were intricately involved with, worked exclusively with national and subnational institutions, strengthening their ability to access international climate finance. So we need more such initiatives that empower subnational local institutions to access and manage climate finance and run adaptation programs. The fifth principle really goes to the heart of climate change adaptation and focuses on building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty. No longer should adaptation projects be exclusively focused on top-down scientific knowledge or the views of experts. We need to make sure that we're melding the views of vulnerable communities, taking traditional and indigenous knowledge alongside downscaled climate projections and expert knowledge to together decide what is the best way of proceeding. Again, there are interesting examples of how this is being done. The Red Cross ran a really interesting initiative in the Philippines where they worked with municipal officials and local communities and climate experts to together understand how climate change was going to impact the water availability in a particular town, and then devised solutions that were contextually relevant for local communities. They did bottom-up risk assessments that drew on the subjective knowledge of communities as opposed to only the objective knowledge that scientific processes extend. So we need to do more of this. The sixth principle is around ensuring flexible programming and learning. We all need to acknowledge that at the local level, the impacts of climate change will always be uncertain. We can never accurately predict what's going to happen. And therefore, we need to ensure that processes of local adaptation can deal with these changing circumstances through management solutions like adaptive management. And this requires flexibility in budgets from international donors and support for innovative monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems that can harvest learnings from a project and plow it back into the project to ensure that it is staying relevant to changing contexts. I know I'm running out of time and I'm going to finish in the next minute or two. But again, there are interesting examples of how flexible programming can be ensured. The BRACED program, which is the world's largest community-based resilience program that ran from 2014 to 2018, if I'm not mistaken, had an interesting crisis modifier fund. And essentially what that meant was that the donor said to people who had accessed money under BRACED that if the context changes in where you're implementing this resilience program, and if you can demonstrate that it's adequately shifted, here's an additional pot of funding that you can apply for, which extended programs on the ground a lot of flexibility in changing with changing circumstances, as opposed to sticking with a plan that was prepared at one fixed moment of time and unfolding that on the ground. The seventh principle is about ensuring transparency and accountability. All those who signed up to these principles acknowledge that for far too long, lines of accountability have run upwards from the local level towards donors. We need to turn that around on its head. We need to make sure that adaptation programs are accountable to local communities, that M&E data is made publicly available, budgets are shared with people and beneficiaries who these programs are trying to help, and also are controlled by local communities. We need to make sure that program documentation is available in different languages, enabling local actors to take an active role in decision-making within these programs. We need to develop new mechanisms through which local communities can question what is happening with adaptation programs. The final principle is around ensuring collaborative action and investment. The last thing that we need in developing countries is different adaptation actors doing overlapping projects that are not synchronized with each other. We need to make sure that different streams of climate finance support each other and are devised keeping in mind what's already happening so that efficiencies are maximized and duplications are reduced. Therefore, we need to have effective collaboration at the national and subnational level to make sure that we are doing whatever we can to empower local communities as opposed to burdening them with different projects that are trying to do the same thing with multiple lines of reporting. I'm sorry, I raced through those principles, but in a minute, I'm going to put a link to a working paper that includes all these principles in much more detail. I also want to abuse the privilege of being a speaker by making a shameless plug for an event on locally led adaptation that we're hosting at the London Climate Action Week on the 1st of July at 3 p.m. British time. Come to this event, please. Learn more about LLA and also learn about a really interesting new initiative called the Adaptation Research Alliance that is inviting members to come and work on interesting pieces of adaptation research, bringing together researchers, practitioners, and donors in one room. 1st of July, 3 p.m. BST. Apologies for that advertisement. Thank you very much, Adriana.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aditya, and an invitation to all of you that are participating in the Youth Adaptation Dialogue to implement in your daily activities the locally led adaptation principles. Then now let's move with the presentation of case studies from young leaders from all over the world. We have three youth leaders. We have Joyce Mendez. She is from Brazil. She is a member of the World Youth Parliament for Water. Also, she is a representative of the Climate Reality Project in Brazil, and she is an ambassador of the Center of the United Nations Constitutional Research. Then also we have Ardi Sarlaus. Ardi is a university student. He is doing his master in climate studying, but also Ardi is the secretary of the International Association of Students in Agriculture and Related Science in the Netherlands. And we have Emmanuel Ntale. He is the former president of Makarere University, a Student Climate Change Association in Uganda. Then welcome. Thank you for joining us. And it is an opportunity to share your experience, your lessons learned, and how you are implementing adaptation. Then I would like to invite first Joyce to showcase and to share your experience. Please, the floor is yours.
Muito obrigada. Muchas gracias. Bom dia, buenos días. I'm really happy to stay here. And I'm going to share some images for me to explain more or less what we have developed. So can you please allow me to share my screen, please? Because I see, all right, I think there it goes. Now it's allowing me. All right, just give me a second. So what I'm gonna do here is that I'm gonna start by introducing you where we are located and some of the projects we have actually developed. So for you to have an understanding, my region is a very transboundary region. We are located in the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. The city in the study case that I'm bringing is from a city called Foz do Iguazu. The name of the city means actually kind of the beginning of the river. So for you to have a reference, this is kind of our daily life, our transboundary. So it is called a terra das águas, or the land of waters, because as you see, we have the Paraná River connecting Paraguay and Brazil, and the Iguazu River connecting Brazil and Argentina, which is famous for the Iguazu Falls. So first of all, I was back 5 years ago at the Federal University for Latin American Integration, UNILA. A couple of students and professors, we were really worried to see how temperatures are really rising a lot, and as well as how climate change impact is, like we see those impacts in our daily life, like way more stronger than ever before. So we had a proposal this is our image of our campus. So we have in our university the students from all Latin America. So we have a huge interculturality exchange, ideas and perspectives of what have worked in other countries of the region, and also what we could do in our region. So as we are always surrounded by water and we see kind of the hydrological cycle changing, we decided to actually create an organization within the university to work in participatory methodologies and actually to develop action resource with the community towards climate change adaptation, resilience, mitigation, and biodiversity protection. So we call it the Local Observatory Moema Vieser, or the Foz do Iguazu Environmental and Educative Observatory. So we are more than 30 volunteers and youth from all countries all around Latin America. And what we decided, as I said, to do is to work with action resource and actually taking this knowledge that communities, our local communities have, in order to develop public policies. So we have several methodologies we have been working on, mainly in social cartography and participatory methodologies, as I said, in order to formulate local public policies and transboundary public policies. So as we see, there are a lot of information we were not finding either in maps or in the internet, but we find the knowledge in the local actors within the community. So doing that, we started developing networks of action within our communities. And we realized that actually there was a lot of knowledge there. And as it was mentioned, multi-language perspective is fundamental to understand and to gather not just the historical data, but also like the scenarios and the future perspectives of how we see our future in our region managed towards climate adaptation. So one of the big projects we have developed is actually to have create the local plan of the Atlantic forest. So what we have done is that the Atlantic forest is a transboundary forest shared with Brazil and Argentina. So we create the local protection, and this had allowed to have investments in the international level, and also to allow biodiversity to become more resilient, as well as our society. So students, what we have done, and not just the students, but volunteers, we have been engaging the community, connecting, actually bringing the different actors from not just Brazil, but also Paraguay and Argentina towards the conversation, getting the data, the information, and bringing people together to have these discussions and to promote this three-nation perspective. So what I have seen is that most of the students, they want to have data, so they come here to our organization also to not just get the data, but understand, study, and also come back to the society with more perspectives and with their dissertation applied to a local reality. And last things we have done is also during this pandemic, obviously, like we believe that formation has to continue. So we have worked actually in the local public policy on environmental education. It's been approved. We have a book about it. And also we have a formation regarding transition towards sustainable cities available on YouTube. So that's pretty much what adaptation or adaptation has meant to us locally. It's been all this question of forming the leaderships as well, the strengthening internationally intersectional cooperation, and obviously local participation with this action research perspectives. So muito obrigada. This is kind of our Instagram. If you want to take a picture, see some pictures and follow our activities. And also if you want to do some research with us, we are really happy. So é isso. Muito obrigada. Até mais.
Joyce, thank you very much. And thank you for sharing this inspiring initiative about what university students can do to connect with local communities. Then now let's move to the Netherlands. And we have Ardi. Ardi, please share with us your experience with the International Association of Students in Agricultural and Related Science. Over to you, Ardi.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll quickly start sharing my screen. There we go. All right. So thank you, Adriana, for the introduction, and especially also for offering me the opportunity for speaking at this event. I'm very proud to be here. So my name is Adi Silos. I'm a first-year student of the Master Climate Studies, and today I'll be presenting indeed on behalf of IAAOS. IAAOS is the biggest student association in the world, and we're connecting over 10,000 students with different backgrounds. We aim to exchange ideas, knowledge, and information among youth, and we want to prepare our members for a future in agriculture. And one way how we try to achieve this is via the village concept projects, or shortly VCPs, and that's what this presentation will be about. So what are VCPs? The village concept projects are large-scale development projects in rural villages in which students with an interest in agriculture are connected with local farmers, because we believe that collaboration is crucial in locally led climate adaptation. So by bringing students in touch with farmers, we hope to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of them are listed in this PowerPoint, such as the Sustainable Development Goal, no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, decent work, economic growth, decent work and economic growth, reduce inequalities, and improve life on land. And the VCPs are based on three key principles. The first principle is the community action. Local students, together with villagers, help each other to establish general and specific objectives to improve living conditions in the area and to adapt to a changing climate. And participation of local leaders and villagers is necessary to establish a village concept project. The second principle is the international cooperation. Students from all over the world participate on a 3-month rotational basis, working on the specific objectives planned for each rotation, together with local students and villagers. And this gives the village concept projects also an educational role. And the third key principle is the intersectorial approach, because by collaborating with also medical and pharmaceutical students, the Village Concept Project do not only contribute to agricultural adaptation, but also improve local health. And the VCPs are fully organized and implemented by youth and student organizations. And as you can see on the map, this happens in places all over the world. Most of the VCPs are currently located in Indonesia, and some also in Nepal, but there are also VCPs in Africa, for example, in Morocco, Togo, and Zimbabwe, and there's also one in Ecuador. An example of a successful village concept project was in the Indonesian Taji village. This VCP was started in 2016, and the initial goal was to increase the quality of life for the local people. This resulted in several projects, such as the socialization of dental health. But I especially like the case of 2018, because in this year, a plant disease occurred in the chili crops, and this resulted in a decrease in the chili yield. And coffee became the main source of income for the local villagers, but they were very dependent on the income of coffee. So to solve this problem, the VCP program came up with two solutions. First of all, the profitability of the coffee was increased by producing coffee jam, as can be seen on the photo in the bottom. And next to that, local farmers were counseled on the prevention of pests in the chili crops, and this resulted in a higher income for the local farmers, and eventually also the chili disease was the problem was resolved. So this was my short presentation on the Village Concept Project. Thank you for your attention, and if you want to know more, you can either contact me or Omar. He's the president of IAAOS, and you could also listen to our podcast. We, since a short time, also have a podcast, and the first episode was about the Village Concept Project. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Artie. And it's excellent. These are the examples of how students can really make a transformation in the communities. And the village concept is an excellent initiative. Then now let's move from the Netherlands. We are going to move to our next speaker. Then Emmanuel, please share with us the experience that you have with the Makarere University. Over to you, Emmanuel. I think that you are mute, Emmanuel.
Hello, are you able to see my screen?
Excellent. We can hear you and we can see the screen.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Emmanuel Ntale from Uganda, and I will share our experiences working with the youth at the front line of community-based and locally led adaptation in Uganda. I'm sharing our experiences on behalf of my colleague, Gordon Mwesigwa, who coordinates community-based internship and research-related activities within Makarere University under the Stewardship Institute for Environment and Natural Development. And me, I'm a founder for Makarere University Climate Change Association and a former leader, but I also work with a loose network of students across Uganda who are implementing different climate change adaptation and mitigation activities across. Yep. So this is the one slide that I want to share our experiences. And I will begin with climate change boot camps. Before the outbreak of the first wave of COVID-19, through the network of the universities, of the youth at the universities and out of university students, we used to hold annual climate change boot camps. And before the outbreak of the COVID wave in Uganda, we had organized up to 4 annual climate change boot camps. And the purpose of these boot camps is to create a cascading effect among youth within universities and out of school, where we equip them with the skills and knowledge for collaborative action. And after these different boot camps, which are a mixture of trainings and also real field-based activities for broadly capacity building and also identifying different very simple climate change adaptation activities that can be implemented across university and also broadly in the communities. And after the boot camps, the other initiative that we've been really involved in, and I want to share the experiences on the internships and field-based learning and research. Working still with the youth across the different streams, majorly from within the Makarere University and also Busitema University, which is in the eastern part of Uganda. The students, after learning, students from across different backgrounds, environment, social sciences, after learning different things in climate change and simple actions they can do, there is placement for field-based learning and research really in the communities. But this kind of research is known to the researcher that is for basically going to the community, asking questions, but it's a participatory research where even the communities are a part of the researchers to identify the questions and the solutions and the answers to those questions, working with the communities, not the normal internship and research placement of students at the universities where yes, they have their questionnaires, they have their tools and their research questions, they go to the communities and the communities are just feeding into information to that. In this is working with the communities through the youth at the universities to answer those different questions and also come up with the solutions, adaptations, interventions, and solutions at the community level. And dissemination of those climate change and adaptation practices and information that has been gathered from across with the different communities. And there we have like the climate change adaptation toolkit, which is a tool that has all the possible adaptation intervention gathered through these different placements and research for students across different communities to kind of broker knowledge from one community to the other. Because from our interaction with these different communities in different interventions, what we've observed, there is really a lot of diversity of knowledge and very simple and less cost-effective actions in these communities. So through this research and field-based learning placements, we come up with the packages like the climate change adaptation toolkit that I've really mentioned, which has been developed by the students with the support from the staff and other colleagues at the universities. The other key intervention is inter-university collaborations and workshop. This is still with the knowledge transfer, peer learning, and experience sharing. Like we've observed that Makarere University, which took lead in, which is like the leading institution with the Climate Change Association, we've been interacting with a couple of universities and we find a knowledge gap. And we do entire university workshops across different universities. We share experiences and knowledge across the youth at different platforms, good practices and interventions we do. And through that, we've really learned a lot and developed collaborative actions or projects that we work on. Those some go even beyond the scope of the students at the universities. And one of that is the climate change education in schools. Through those different engagements across knowledge brokering and experience sharing with the universities and the tutors at the university, we developed packages in order to transfer this knowledge to students and learners in primary, secondary, and infantry kind of levels to teach them and they learn and also be able to make commitments of very simple actions, climate change adaptation and mitigation actions that they can do at their local level at that. And a couple of dialogues among university students and youth experts. We organize dialogues through the Students Network with the mentorship and leadership of the Stewardship Institute for Environment and Development and other stakeholders within the universities that we work with. We have workshops where we get the experts and then the students, they interface with the students, and then we share knowledge and experiences. And the other event is the exhibitions and experience sharing. We develop a couple of products that, hello? Yes, we develop a couple of products that we exhibit on events. In Uganda, we used to have a major event before the outbreak of COVID-19 that we call the Kampala Capital City Festival. It's a major city carnival which brings multitudes of people from across the different cities in Uganda to the capital city to see a variety of stuff, but specifically the students through these networks, we share our climate change stories, adaptation interventions. That's what you see in the last picture in the left at the city carnivals, and students support a couple of interventions at the carnival, and they share that through arts, music, exhibitions, and different activities. And all these interventions and initiatives are ongoing. They are annual events, and seek collaboration and partnership with the other networks and also institutions to enable us to push these initiatives forward, like from the boot camp to placements and learning, the
Emmanuel,
collaborations and the events. Yes.
I think that we are running out of time.
Actually, that's my
Maybe
last presentation. That's my last slide, and that's my last statement.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing with us also your experience in Uganda. And now I would like to invite you everyone to turn on your cameras, because we are going to continue with two activities. We are going to take a family photo, then please turn on your cameras, and my colleague Saleem will continue helping. And the last part of this will be a Mentimeter session, when we will have some questions about locally led adaptation and what can you do. Then please turn on your cameras, and Celine, you please guide us about this photo. Then we are on your hands. Please guide us. Celine?
Okay, I'm just gonna do it from my side, and I hope everyone is ready for this. So I will take the screenshots now. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Great. So I have the first screen. Please stay on and keep your camera on, because I don't know who appears on the second screen or first screen. So please bear with me and stay on. And then I will take the second shot. So
in the meantime that Josh is doing the photo, then thank you very much to everyone. We don't, for this last part, I will hand over to Josh, but a special thanks to all of our speakers, and especially to ICCCAD for being our partner, and an invitation that we have that you continue with the youth dialogues. Then Josh, you will continue with the photos that everyone will be there, and we will share in our social media channels. And also I hand over to you to continue with the Mentimeter. Thank you very much, Josh.
Great, and thanks, Adriana. So I think we are good with the photos. Once again, thanks. And if you can keep your video on, that will still be very much appreciated. And if not, that is also fine. I'm going to introduce Samuel. So Samuel Adunkere is part of the Youth Adaptation Network, and works in Nigeria as part of Innovia Hub. Samuel, if you are here, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can address the questions that we've received so far to the respective speakers and take us.
All right, thank you, Joshua, and thank you, panelists and moderator, for the wonderful delivery so far. So we have a launch of the Mentimeter. Adriana, could you please share the Mentimeter screen? Or Joshua?
Yeah, I will share the screen, so no worries.
All right, there we go. So the first question on the Mentimeter, if you have a, you could just log on to menti.com, www.menti.com, and use the code 10894915 to access. So the first question goes thus: that what are the gaps and needs for locally led adaptation? And then we have the second question, and which says, what will you do differently to bring students into the framework of locally led adaptation? In just one word, to summarize your experience. And then finally, I think we've got a question from the chat from Emmanuel to Dr. Salim, and The question is, what experiences do you have in terms of sustaining student-led initiatives and locally led adaptation actions that last beyond students' time at universities and school? It just means the sustainability of student-led initiatives in school and how it can just be incorporated into the society, their development approach. Okay, so we're having wonderful responses from the first questions and that are identifying the gaps for use in locally led adaptation. And we have lack of knowledge and funding. We've seen much of capacity building and mentorship. We've seen much of partnership, inadequate support for policymakers, knowledge, and then the realization that adaptation to climate change is context dependent. So, and we're also seeing inputs like lack of opportunities and structural inequalities of sustained activities and lack of funding and non-acceptance, that's acceptance issues related to adaptation problems and challenges. Okay, that's awesome. Can we go over to the next question? Okay, and the question says, in one word, what summarizes your key takeaways? So we can as well type the answers to the second question as we begin to receive entries for the said actions and questions. That is summary of experiences and key takeaways from locally led adaptation activities. Okay, we've seen collaborative action, we've seen participatory processes, partnership, still speaking about the same thing. That's great. Okay, we can see mitigation, we can see adaptation, we can see motivation. Okay, we can see connections, connectivity. So boils down to collaboration. Okay, we can see intergenerational justice as well, and action towards research and development. Okay, awesome. Those are awesome and wonderful entries. Okay, great. I think we've had wonderful responses. Okay, we can see mobilization as well. These are wonderful questions and takeaways towards adaptation processes and activities. Thank you very much for your activity and for your time out. So I think we have one question left, and that's directed from Emmanuel to Dr. Saleemul. Dr. Saleemul, if you're still there, the question from Emmanuel goes to us that what experiences do you have in terms of sustaining student-led initiatives and locally led adaptation actions that last beyond students' activities and engagements in school? So how can students actually engage further in their projects, in their activities after school?
I'm not so sure if Dr. Salim Hook is still with us. I'm just going to look at my colleagues at ICCCAD if anyone wants to step in and provide a response to this, given your extensive knowledge on locally led action and student groups, or the colleagues from LAC as well.
That's so, do we have anyone from the audience to respond to this
thank you, Josh. Maybe I can try and take a stab at some of the activities that we've been doing with youth that are outside of university groups as well. So as my colleague Aditya had mentioned about the community-based adaptation conference that happened last week, we actually had several speakers that were very prominent youth activists that were working within their own communities. They'd set up their own community groups, their own networks. Some of them had also established their own organizations as youth-led organizations working on locally led adaptation issues. But one of the, again, as Aditya mentioned about the challenges, one of those challenges is that not all youth, particularly youth in developing countries, will be able to do those sorts of activities themselves. Oftentimes there are family commitments, there are economic commitments, there are struggles that people are going to be having, particularly in developing countries where oftentimes the university age youth are, oftentimes those youth themselves are expected to contribute to the family. They're supposed to be supporting. They have to get a job, they have to go into some sort of a career, and they're actively looking after perhaps younger siblings or elderly family relatives. So quite often what we've been trying to address when we're looking at these sorts of issues is engaging with students while they're still in school, while they're still in college or university, where by at that time, at least if they're able to bring up their own experiences, develop their own track record of working in these issues, when they do leave university and they become young professionals, they're joining the workforce, then they're more capable because they've had the skills and the experiences built in. It's something that they've been able to do either as forming as university clubs or even outside of formal education. And again, some of the examples of the youth speakers that I mentioned, a lot of them, that's exactly how they started. They started by doing, activities that they would be doing after school, things that they were engaging with in their own communities, and using those experiences to try and develop themselves so that they could engage with these things after they've formally left the education system. And I don't know if that's the full brunt of the experiences for
All right.
people in the audience, if they'd like to chime in as well. What do you think are some of the good ways of being able to engage youth? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Sadiq. Look, I think Emmanuel is satisfied with the response from his chat and the group chat. So I would like to throw this additionality. If there is anyone who is willing to provide additional inputs or response to that question.
Perhaps we have just, I would like to add something that, as I mentioned, is very interesting as well and important regarding whenever it's youth that it's not related to university, as to have youth-led projects. So done for youth and by youth. This is also very important because sometimes we see that regarding intergenerational and intragenerational justice, we would like to have like more kind of the same communication, and as well to have like certain tools so youth can understand and support each other. Can be from universities or from several civil society groups or even research groups. So this is actually very important, like these partnerships within youth organizations.
All right, thank you very much, Joyce. And at this point in time, I will have to hand over the floor to Joshua to continue with the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samuel, and thanks to everyone who participated in today's session. We are very tight on time, so please bear with us with the little minutes that we've gone over. It's been a great session. We've heard from sort of very great researchers and advocates for locally led action. I see we've expanded our knowledge on what locally led action means and also the relevance of adaptation from the brilliant speech from Dr. Saleem, but also learning what we can do as young people, part of the network, looking at the case studies that our three young leaders shared. This is the first session of the Youth Adaptation Dialogues. In the month of July, there will be another dialogue that will focus on innovation, and we will circulate this through the Youth Adaptation Network mailing list, but also on the GCA website. So for those who received the communication through the mailing list, you'll be updated on the next event. Those who check the website to be here, please keep following the website and you get the updates. Because of course, one webinar cannot exhaust a whole topic. Our intention is to migrate the conversation from the webinars to the Adaptation Exchange platform. which is a platform which you will see when you visit the GCA website. We are going to create a community there for each of the topics. So for locally-led action, you can access the recording of the event and the YouTube video on the Adaptation Exchange, and there will be a community there where you can still advance conversation by asking further questions, and we will have experts, part of the Global Center on Adaptation, to respond to these questions so that we can keep the conversation going. So with that, really thanks a lot for being here. Thanks to our young leaders. And if you are a young leader yourself and you are interested to also present your case study or share your case study in one of the dialogues, or if you're part of a network that would want to co-host one of the dialogues like what we had today with ICCCAD, please reach out to us at youth@gca.org, which I'm just typing in the chat, and we can keep in touch with you. It will run from this month, June, all the way to December, and every month there will be a new topic that we will get experts and young leaders to do their case studies on. Thanks a lot, and please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you in the next dialogue. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone.